In today's episode of EU5, as you requested, I will show you how to take over an entire continent for yourself. Maximize trade income through the urbanization of colonies. I have compiled the entire strategy into a few simple steps. Step 1 is the current situation and my adjustments from the previous episode. Step 2 is acquiring the 3 most important things needed for colonization. Step 3, where I will show you how to quickly discover the new world. Step 4 is the initial colonization strategy. Step 5 is the conquest of Central America. Step 6, I will show you a method for rapid colonization, making America my continent. Step 7 is 3 strategies to maximize colonization. And the bonus step 8 is acquiring Greenland. Welcome imperialists, Lucas here. My England in 1476 has nearly 2,800 tax base, which gives me almost 800 gold in pure profit. I have 100,000 levies, which is completely irrelevant, because in reality 24,000 of my army is enough to defeat any opponent. France is my bank, from which I will be conquering small amounts of territory in the near future. But I will be squeezing it for massive amounts of cash, meaning I will continue what I was doing in the previous episode. This is what the values in my countries look like, as well as the privileges and strengths of the estates. When it comes to technological research, basically the entire colonization path is still left for me to discover, because it was the last institution I unlocked. I also need to slightly update my strategy from the previous episode. Specifically, it concerns the vassal in Aquitaine. You can set a scutage on him, meaning the vassal pays us in exchange for not joining offensive wars. He will still participate in defensive ones. However, even at the beginning, this vassal gives us over 6 gold to the budget, and that value will only grow. So in the long run, this is actually a more profitable approach than the one I proposed. But there is a very important condition. When the 100 Years' War begins, we must be the side that attacks every time the truce ends. Because indeed, I was misled here by Paradox and the tooltip description, which suggests that the goal of the war is to capture capitals. But no, as usual, Paradox overlooked it, so it's not really my fault. The goal of this war is solely to win battles. So my strategy of staying on the island and crushing the enemy army will work perfectly well. And yes, you still need to sell those 3 locations earlier. The sooner you do it, the faster the enemy will land on your island. And as you can see, my vassal does not participate in this war. The downside of this solution is that you must be the attacking side, so you need to make sure you have a casus belli to attack France. And unfortunately, you won't always have that casus belli, because you get it from events from time to time. And sometimes it may happen that France attacks you first, and then, unfortunately, the vassal participates in the war. Of course, we can solve this problem very easily. You just need to find strong allies so that France won't attack you without reason. Another mistake was that I forgot to unlock theaters and the art schools, which means I don't have a cultural hegemon. And it will now be harder for me to deal with this Irish culture that hates me. And yes, I could have solved this problem using the tactic I showed in the Spain episode. That is, 1 province equals 1 subject state on which I enforce a culture change. And that is exactly what I should have done in Ireland and in the territory of Scotland. I have to admit, those 2 areas are quite fragmented, and this would also solve my problem with those cultures that are hostile toward me. That is why, ultimately, I would strongly lean into decentralization until 1600 and only then switch to centralization. And that's it. Those are the only changes I would make to the previous episode. And let me know whether, if I think something works better, I should inform you about it in the next episode or just in a pinned comment. And yes, this England is very well prepared for colonization. And all that's left for me is to show you how to discover America as quickly as possible. Maybe ENEBA is not America, but it is a great place to buy games cheaply. It is a trusted partner of this channel. You can find links to promotions in the description of this video. For colonization, I will need 3 things: money, a population, and the right technology. I already have the money. I can still work on the population. But first, I will start with technology, because that is the fastest part. To be able to colonize the New World at all, you must have this institution. Usually, either Portugal or Spain has the highest chances of obtaining it, because due to their geographical location, they quickly discover the coast of South America. To acquire this institution quickly, you simply need to conduct some trade with Castile or Portugal, or obtain a special cabinet action in the 3rd era. the promotion of the institution, and introduce it in your capital. Because once it appears in the capital, it will spread very quickly throughout the country, speeding up the implementation process, while the first choice in this tree is quite obvious. Further on, there are many technologies, and choosing the wrong path can significantly delay the entire colonization process. Now then, if you don't have much to explore, your first step should be to unlock overseas exploration as quickly as possible. This will open the way for your ships across this entire area. Then I would focus on speeding up world discovery, as well as all modifiers that accelerate the preparation of expeditions. It is sometimes worth going back even to the previous era. Some cultures may have access to it earlier. After that, naval range and diplomatic range are very useful, especially if you plan to wage war with someone. It's also good to establish positive relations. Once you have this unlocked and your discoveries are underway, the next most important thing is to unlock the technology for iron production. Unless you are unlucky and iron does not occur in your region. This modifier affects both the production you have in RGOs and in furnaces that produce iron. So now that I have my research set, I will focus on population and food. This is the moment when every one of your provinces should already have a town, and those with the highest control close to 80 to 100 points a city. Of course, only if you want to. I'm not forcing you to play in any particular way, but I'm talking about efficiency. It would be even better to generally turn all towns into cities. That would give a significant boost to population, especially since you are already earning and can afford it. In cities, you can place many more granaries, which will affect this modifier, large food storage. Another modifier worth influencing is cheap food. This modifier can be negative when food is expensive. Food prices differ in every market, and ultimately I want it to be as low as possible, 0.1. Anything more expensive is actually bad. That's why I still have a lot of work to do in Dublin. A map with this name can help you see where you have food shortages. And of course, within each province you need to click through and check whether you can do anything about it. In this case, I have 3 locations per province, and in each one there is no resource in the RGOs that would produce food. Well, okay, there is wool. Fortunately, I can do something here and expand irrigation to the maximum. However, even so, I wouldn't demolish this town, because the other resources are much more valuable, and it's worth maximizing their extraction. And you just have to accept that you'll need to pay for food. Here, however, by the English Channel, I have a province where none of the locations produce food. Personally, I tested it. In cities, you can build orchards, but they are a waste of money because they are terrible. They produce very little food, and it's simply not worth assigning workers to them. So I would rather think about food in terms of the market, keeping it cheap, and possibly improving production wherever it's actually feasible. And as I said, it's not always possible. In general, when it comes to food production, first you need to expand RGOs. You can see it's neglected in Ireland. And secondly, all rural buildings available to peasants that provide food production bonuses such as irrigation or farms. Optionally, as a last resort, fishing villages. But usually you will have to cover their maintenance costs. Another thing is values. If you plan to play for colonization, you want to focus on the value that encourages migration. If you haven't yet switched from a traditional economy to a capitalist one, this might be a good moment to start that process. You will get plenty of basic resources from your colonies. It's also worth preparing a few things in your markets, especially those that will export goods to the New World. It's useful for them to have a surplus in masonry. I know it's not flashy, but you will most likely need to export stone to the New World. There's always a shortage of it there, a surplus of wood, and a surplus of tools as well. So as you can see, all 3 basic resources needed to construct new buildings in the New World. As for stone, don't build it in cities anymore. I'll be honest, soon I will be demolishing all worker production buildings from cities and towns. Build them in rural areas, even if they are only marginally profitable. Cities will soon, within the next 50 years, be filled entirely with urban buildings, and it's a waste of space to use them for this type of building, which generates very little income. If you haven't yet taken care of trade capacity, it's also worth doing that now, because roughly 1/3 of that trade will be used to transport stone and wood to the New World. When it comes to parliament, during this period, I mainly use it to raise taxes or possibly to introduce legal changes. And basically, now that I've told you about all these things, I personally will focus on having my advisor encourage migration to towns so that they can be turned into cities. Because remember, we need 30,000 citizens for cities. I am also integrating all my remaining Irish vassals. I am also building my 3rd governor, or rather, a coastal governor, which for now will be located in Dublin. And I can build it because, first of all, I have this government reform that grants access to these buildings. Secondly, I don't have a land connection to the capital. And I am still on the same continent. Dublin is a very good port, but it has one downside. In my opinion, it's too close to Bristol, and I won't benefit much from it. And looking at Ireland, it seems to me that a port located in Galway would be much better. Alternatively in Belfast, because here again we have Glasgow, which will be an excellent crossing point, and look, only 2 sea locations between Belfast and Glasgow, but don't worry, we will definitely test this later in the episode. I forgot that England has this building that comes from an event, a small capital that gives plus 50 proximity points. I'm taking it. But you know what's funniest? I still get proximity from the capital to York anyway, so in reality this building didn't give me anything. Paradox should probably buff it. Unlocking explorers and the ability for naval exploration basically means I can move on to the next step, where I will show you how to quickly discover the new world. Explorers are characters that you can recruit for 1000 gold. Although you usually get the first one for free, this character, however, is distinguished by having special traits suited for exploration. These can either reduce costs, which is actually unlucky, or speed up exploration. Or sometimes these traits can even be negative. However, the breakthrough moment is unlocking this technology, because now I will be able to explore the open seas. This opens up many new regions to discover. Speaking of exploration, you can carry it out in several ways. First, by selecting a region from this list, or through the map view, these areas will be highlighted, and you can right-click to send an expedition. In both cases, the next step is choosing the location from which the expedition will depart. The green shade on the map means the expedition will prepare quickly. In red locations, it takes longer. Then you choose the leader of the expedition. As usual, all types of stats of a given character affect the expedition. For me, the most important stat is the military one, because I want the expeditions to be as efficient as possible. Because the costs and the time of the initial preparation are not that important, unless you are short on money. But for me, that's not a problem. And yes, here on this list you also have explorers. And don't send expeditions from a single location, because each expedition needs time to prepare, meaning gathering resources from the market. If all of them are in one location, they will depart one after another. But you can send all expeditions at once, just from different locations. In theory, this process can also be automated. However, I will be sending them manually, because automation doesn't work very well here. When an expedition is preparing, it doesn't seem to generate any cost. At least I don't see anything here. However, when you receive this notification, it means it is ready and has just set out on its journey. And that's when the exploration starts costing money. You can see the progress of the expedition here, as well as its estimated completion date. As a rule, expeditions almost always end in success. I haven't had one fail yet. If you've experienced a failed exploration, let me know in the comments. But be careful, there are 2 other exploration methods that are even more effective. Through stealing maps, for which you need to accumulate 50 espionage points, or as a result of war, where you can demand maps. The downside of both methods is that the opponent must already possess them. While waiting to discover the new world, I will focus on securing funding from the French. Because let's be honest, colonization itself is simply very boring. And you need to spice up the gameplay somehow. And what could be better than sacking Paris? Beating up the French just never gets old for me. And it's not that I dislike the French, they are just an easy target. If, for example, I were playing France, by the way, do you want an episode on that? I would be doing exactly the same to Castile, because it is a richer and easier country to conquer than England. Alternatively, I would go after some other large country nearby. At some point, when you are already a large country and there is another large neighbor next to you, it's nice to turn them into a so-called bank. By the way, the amount of money you can loot depends on loans. And the size of loans depends on the wealth of the social estates. So in theory, the lower the control in the country you are at war with, the more loans it can take. Because look, even if France itself is not particularly wealthy, for example, the nobility has a ton of money. In reality, France can borrow more than I can. I feel like Paradox didn't fully think through this mechanic. So now, every few years with each war, I will conquer some small area and take a lot of money and war reparations. Oh, and one more thing, I'm not conquering territories to which I have claims, because that will allow me to conquer all of France 25% cheaper. And France has just funded major development in Ireland. Oh, and in Scotland as well. I'm also doing one more thing here. I conquered those Norman territories. In order to relocate the population from there to London, I developed the technology that increases the range of my navy. Look what happened. The list of potential explorations has exploded. There's a massive number of them now. The worst part is that now I have to click through all of this manually, because automation can handle a maximum of 10. And I've practically used up most of the people I could send on expeditions. And I won't hide it, clicking through all of this is extremely boring. If anyone from Paradox is watching this, please set some kind of numerical limit on the number of expeditions that can be sent. Because I don't know why, but the automation sends a maximum of 5 expeditions. Since there is a slider here, why isn't there one for expeditions? I know it's expensive, but I can afford it. Because I want to discover the entire coast of North America as quickly as possible. Especially since I can see that Portuguese colonies are already forming in the south. And now, when the economy has really taken off, the Caribbean and the coasts of America have been discovered, something terrible has happened. Bohemia has colonized Greenland. How on earth did Bohemia colonize Greenland if it didn't have access to the sea? I mean, now it does, but before it didn't. But okay, realistically, the coasts of America have been discovered. My English population is multiplying like rabbits, probably in part thanks to settlers from Normandy. Urbanization is a slow process, but it is progressing very well. Food prices in all my markets are very low, which translates into incredibly high population growth. That means I can move on to the next step, which is proper colonization. Nevertheless, I still need to unlock a few things, especially these two technologies. Then, unfortunately, I need to catch up on some backlog technologies, mainly those available exclusively to Catholicism, because I plan to switch to Anglicanism. I also have the centers for acquiring cheap labor still left to research. And once I take the last valuable bonus from Catholicism, I want to unlock all technologies that increase migration to colonies. It will also be useful to develop special colonial laws, colonial range, as well as trade range. I start colonization practically right away in the Caribbean regions. Colonies are created at the province level, not at the location level. Each subsequent one will be more expensive. There is also a colonial map that can help you with all of these. And yes, colonizing such an area all at once is a bit costly for me. So I will show you a better method, I just need to unlock it first. Unfortunately, currently you don't have much control over where the population is taken from for colonies. That is not entirely true. Population always migrates from accepted or tolerated cultures, and the same applies to religion. A given province will only be colonized when each location within the province has at least 1,000 colonists. And the population of the required culture and religion makes up more than 50% of the local population. I developed policies toward the natives, and honestly, the trade one seems the strongest. For Christian countries. That's because Christian countries can only have slaves on plantations, nowhere else. Otherwise, the subject-based policy seems the best as it converts all tribespeople into slaves. And why did I choose this? Alright, I just clicked it by mistake, I'll change it later. Or maybe I'll test it. There aren't many natives in the Caribbean. But in Central America, there are many more. Although, let's be honest, a large portion of this population will die out soon anyway. But they will still be workers ready to work on plantations, just with really low wages. And when Europeans arrive in the New World, it triggers a smallpox plague on Tortuga. Oh no, it is a disaster worse than the Black Death. And thanks to it, conquering Mesoamerica becomes incredibly easy. Sometimes, however, this epidemic can bug out and remain confined to the Caribbean. That's why I also begin colonizing this area, and I also advise against clicking any options here. This epidemic can still bug out and never disappear. Even in this save, I had to roll back 50 years, because I chose the option to pay for medicine. And the plague never ended, even though in reality it was already gone. And here you can see how the population of the Maya has changed, and now, since I also have colonies and Portugal has colonies, the division of the world begins, unfortunately, not in London. This treaty means that the entire uncolonized world is divided between the first two Catholic countries that engage in colonization. Countries of other religions simply ignore this treaty and its effects. The spheres of influence are quite clearly visible in this case. During treaty negotiations, I can demand specific regions, and so can Portugal. These regions must be adjacent to existing colonies. We can speed up signing the treaty. If in a given area both my colonies and Portuguese colonies already exist, I can simply take over that region, and I can also revoke Portuguese claims. I don't really understand the shifting the line option, it should just move the line dividing the world. But this is how it looks and I don't know what it changes, probably nothing. And finally, switching sides, but Portugal also has to agree to that. So for me, at this point, practically all of North and South America falls under my control, and Portugal gets the rest of the world. However, the real magic of colonization begins when you unlock this technology. It adds the option to boost a colonial charter. You select a cabinet member who performs this action, and then they encourage population from a given area to migrate to a specific colony, which significantly accelerates its growth and lasts until a province is formed there. And several really powerful features are tied to this option. All cabinet members can perform it, and you can greatly accelerate the development of a single colony or as many as you have advisors in the cabinet. Personally, I like assigning one advisor to one colonial charter because it simply reduces the amount of clicking. Another great thing is that in this case, when performing this action, we can direct a specific population to settle there. So I could, in theory, get rid of the Irish and thus convert this entire region to English culture faster. And honestly, I don't know why I only thought of this in post-production while editing this video. And shortly after, there it is, my first established colony. And as I mentioned earlier, all locations within the province have met the requirements for its creation, and usually at this point you have one of three choices. Keep it as part of England, and thanks to that you will get cores on these locations and won't need to integrate them. You get these cores, of course, if your culture is dominant there. Start a new life in the colonies. And note, this is the only moment when you can switch to a colonial nation. There is no option, like in EU4, to create a large colonial nation first and only then switch to it. But there is a trick. Within a single colonial region, you start colonization, where you want your capital to be, and a month later you begin colonizing the entire area. When this option appears, you choose to switch to the colony. And in theory, the AI should attach the remaining territories to you as they get colonized. Then we can also create a colonial nation that will be subject to us. And you can also create it later, by choosing this option and then selecting a colonial nation from the list here. At the beginning, I recommend keeping everything for yourself, because look at how much savings the social estates have, especially the burghers and the nobility. And it is their money that will fund buildings here. I didn't build any of these buildings myself. Instead, I focus on constructing settlements. There is just one small problem. As I mentioned, there is a shortage of stone and wood here. That's why I will export these construction resources from my market in Dublin, which has sufficient range. I also unlocked voluntary labor centers, and I am building them wherever possible. And soon I will also be exporting workers to America. And after a while, a lot of wood and stone is flowing into the New World. Although something bugged out here and it doesn't show me the places where I can build because apparently I'm not the owner. Very strange. Even though I am, nevertheless, settlements are being built here. And remember, settlements are very effective in increasing population growth and encouraging migration. And unfortunately, at the moment when my colonies were developing well and I needed time for my Central American colonies to stabilize, this happened. The Maya Empire collapsed, and I intend to take advantage of it. Which brings me to the next step, conquering Central America. And honestly, Europa Universalis 5 surprised me, and I'm not ready for this war, so first I pull my regular troops back to England. Personally, I had planned to first colonize this area, build at least one fortress, because the AI likes to siege fortresses, I don't know why, and only then attack the Maya. Such a war is usually much easier. First, I reorganize my army into smaller units. And most importantly, in terms of supply, I cannot afford to get penalties for army size, because then it would consume supplies faster than it could acquire them. I also add some outdated supply wagons. I didn't think I would need them so soon. Oh well. And I make sure that my fleet, which is about to sail to the New World, has its holds full of food. Then I set off for the New World via sea routes. There probably aren't any better options here. However, going back to our colonies, it took a very long time for settlements to be built here, and now I see there's another problem I forgot about: market access. And as it happens, we are part of that market, so I need to create my own. Ideally, the market capital should be located in a location with a very good natural harbor. Creating a new market can be expensive, although in this case it isn't. But there is a trick here. By reducing your income, essentially bringing it to zero, then waiting a month, suddenly creating the market becomes much cheaper. Although in this specific case it wasn't worth it. However, some markets can be much more expensive. So anyway, I create a port in this location. After establishing the new market, I remember to redirect the transport of both stone and wood here. And going back to the war itself. my ships have arrived and they are terribly damaged. So you always need to make sure that before sailing to the New World, they are fully repaired. Repair speed depends on harbor capacity as well as all port buildings. Unfortunately, I don't have such a place in the New World. It's best to split the army so they don't operate in the same province. This way, they won't consume each other's food supplies. Fortunately, thanks to the smallpox plague, the Maya army has been reduced from 40,000 to 4,000. And those 4,000 have already come out to meet us. And they stand no chance in this battle. Literally no chance. When it comes to sieging fortresses, here we are dealing with simple palisades, which I will immediately assault despite the game discouraging it. Besides, my own territories are very close, so the army will recover quickly, and with another army I proceed with further military operations. During my invasion, the Treaty on the Division of the World was concluded. This means that, as I mentioned earlier, I can only colonize areas marked in red, while Portugal gets everything else. If I remember correctly, other countries will receive antagonism if they try to colonize these territories. In fact, the AI probably avoids it altogether. This treaty will only last for a certain time, until the indicator drops to 0, or until one of the parties changes religion to something other than Catholic. Additionally, I have several actions available. I can exchange areas with the Portuguese or demand the transfer of a specific area, but the worst is yet to come. A flood of notifications that Catholic countries decide not to respect the treaty, and each such decision shortens its duration. I end the war with the Maya by capturing half of their empire. For myself, but more importantly, I will create a custom subject in this territory, but only on the lands I conquered. However, I won't create a colonial nation here, but rather a fief or a vassal. Still, I must be careful not to create too many, so as not to reduce my centralization. I will assign each vassal 2 provinces to manage. Although I must admit these vassals are very disloyal, and I had to use the option to support loyalists. And then I will want to change the culture and religion in each of these vassals later. In the end, I released 4 vassals, I couldn't afford more. Unfortunately, focusing on centralization was a mistake. I also left a few locations here so I can continue attacking other countries, however, I won't rush it. Because for me now, the main goal is to colonize the entire coastline, to cut off other European countries from colonizing North America, possibly also South America as well as the Caribbean, and in the next step, I will show you how to quickly take over the entire coastline. However, first I will take care of the settlements so that they operate at full efficiency. That means I need to provide them with access to all those goods, otherwise population growth and migration will be proportionally reduced. And population growth itself can be really fast thanks to this. Now let's move on to colonization. At first, however, I focused on South America. I took the entire coastline all the way to the Portuguese territories. I'm playing on standard settings as far as I checked, and every country can colonize. For example, in Africa, I can see Aragon here. After creating a new market, it's best to build at least one town. So now I'm sending glass. That's because in a town you can build warehouses, which can then be filled with these basic goods. Then I construct a few basic buildings producing essential construction materials, as well as masonry workshops and lumber camps. Thanks to this, construction of new buildings should never come to a halt. I developed the colonial policy technology. And for me, there's nothing better than simply establishing colonies. It will increase migration by 100%. Cheaper colonies will also come in handy, especially since I'm already spending over 500 gold on this, and best of all, this policy also affects how effective the cabinet action encouraging resettlement is. And now, when the nearest coastline of South America is practically entirely occupied by me, unfortunately I can't go here because these are Portuguese territories, so now I'm sending my colonists to the western coast of South America and to the eastern coast of North America, especially the Gulf of Mexico. And I assign my advisors specifically to these colonies. The eastern coast is much closer to England, therefore the main modifier affecting migration size receives only a small penalty for distance. I literally can't keep up with clicking all these new colony notifications. Then I add more settlements, then I ensure transport of goods again. And yes, this strategy works, just look at the population growth. In the year 1530, 2 things happened, including one significant event, the Council of Trent, which doesn't interest me much, and the second very important one, the English Act of Supremacy. That is the option to convert to Anglicanism, which I ultimately decide to do. The requirements to adopt Anglicanism are very simple. First, Protestantism must have appeared. The time frame is between 1530 and 1560. We must have a male ruler who has a wife, but no male heir. The Anglican Church has several nice features. For example, we can loot monasteries, I can deport heretics, slightly speed up scientific research, and a few other interesting things. I also have aspects of faith similar to Protestantism. And you have to admit, these aspects are quite interesting, some of them even very powerful. For example, the one that increases literacy across the entire country by 10%, and also increases the satisfaction of all estates by 1, or the one that increases our income from minting, or the one that increases tolerance toward heretics. However, at the beginning I choose this aspect, because it provides a gain in religious influence, which will allow me to accumulate the necessary points faster to introduce additional aspects, and at the moment this develops somewhat slowly. Besides, I waited with Anglicanism until the formation of Great Britain, purely for roleplay reasons, nothing more. Basically, all these developments are the same as for England. This is also the moment when I begin annexing my vassals in Central America, because they've already done what they were supposed to do, and I must admit, their annexation is actually very fast. And so, I enter the Age of Reformation. When it comes to military ideas, I would only take them for the increase in accepted cultures percentage. And the increase in army supply limit, it's very useful, I don't see other valuable bonuses there. In administrative ideas during this period, I really like the increase in tolerance of non-believers as well as heretics. However, my Great Britain is a colonial trade empire, so I follow the diplomatic path. These will both increase migration to the colonies and reduce the cost of establishing them. Now I will focus on conquering Central America while waiting for the colonization of the western coast, which is progressing quite quickly. First, I send my agents to build a spy network. In my case, I will use a religious casus belli for conquests, because these countries are small enough that, despite the negative modifiers, I will likely conquer them in a single war. If you don't have a religious casus belli, you will probably use the exploration one. These wars after the plague shouldn't be difficult. I take all provinces for myself, all except the last one. All of this is to farm some prestige first. At the end, these small countries will form a coalition, and I will conquer them in a single war anyway. And most importantly, if these tribes here have their own vassals, try to release them. Because I really don't want to inherit vassals in this region, and after a year-long campaign, it looks very good. When it comes to the larger countries, here I definitely use fabricated casus belli with the threaten war option, where I demand something I know they won't give me, because this allows me to conquer 25% more. Even though the enemy armies here are larger, I still won't have any problems because I literally defeat them in a single battle. They really stand no chance, and during this war I finally become an empire, which grants me another local governor. And I think building it in Glasgow is a very good idea. After a while, I only had about 1/3 of Mexico left to conquer, and at the same time I started colonizing the western coast of North America, whose colonization will unfortunately be much slower, because I have already taken almost the entire eastern coast, along with Canada. To speed up colonization of the western coast, I had previously prepared a base of English settlers here. Well, at least there are some of them here, because now I simply support colonization of the western coast from these locations since it's closer from here. Fortunately, this coastline is generally much shorter than the western one. From time to time, rebellions will unfortunately occur. And honestly, I usually use levies to suppress them. Alternatively, nearby regular armies. And yes, this is the downside of keeping all locations under my direct control for now. I have already managed to unlock the first 2 institutions, and first I research the initial developments because they are really strong, but then I move on to military development since I neglected that aspect in the previous era. Fortunately, cannons can also lead to increased taxation as well as cheaper colonization. And then from barracks I go straight into infantry and heavy lancers. And basically that takes care of upgrading my army, for now at least. Now the fleet. Here I will go towards galleons and better transport ships. This will also give me access to a better port. Unfortunately, I have to wait with upgrading trade ships until I develop the institution of confessionalism. However, this era also provides an incredible production boost. And the most important thing for me in England is the invention of tool manufacturing plants. If time allows and I don't have confessionalism yet, I will upgrade all textile manufactories. And to be honest, a period of major modernization is ahead of me, which I had already prepared for by building construction centers all across England, literally everywhere. Because that provides one additional construction queue. And now I also need to increase my trade capacity, and while my England is modernizing, I return to conquests. In these territories, when I conquer them, I demolish all fortresses. There will be many rebellions here, and unfortunately I won't deal with them quickly, so every single fortress here would only prolong those rebellions. Now I also carry out major urbanization of all my conquered territories. Basically, locations with a population above 20,000 I turn into a town, then into a city. And I do the same in my main colonies. Wherever possible, I build towns. And essentially, by the year 1580, the entire coastline of North America has been secured by me. Now I can move on to the next step, where I will show you several colonization strategies. And which one you choose is up to you, because there are quite a few different ones. And essentially, I will talk about all of this from a historical perspective, so to speak, because I played another 40 years. A common element of all my strategies is that I try to keep the center of trade under my control. Likewise, it was very important for me to retain the entire coastline for myself. In every colonial region where there was a large native population, I created at least one subject nation, such as a dominion. Dominions do not negatively affect centralization, I don't see them on this list. A dominion also adopts the religion, culture and language of the country that releases it, so there's no need to enforce changes. If you don't have access to dominions, then I'm not sure what determines that. I would release fiefs instead, or a colonial nation, although I'm not a fan of that. Admittedly, a colonial nation can employ that very cheap labor force in RGOs, which is its unique feature. However, it only pays 2.5% tribute from its economic base, and it transfers 10% of its manpower and sailors. The territories of a colonial nation are not developed by my own social estates, and if these colonies don't have sufficient throughput, they won't be able to attract that free labor either. However, what bothers me the most about colonial nations is that they only transfer 33% of their merchants to me. That means only 33% of trade power and trade capacity. Although you can boost this effect by an additional 50% using that diplomatic option. But that increases their desire for independence. And that's not ideal. Colonial nations, just like dominions, do not negatively affect centralization. Now, about the three approaches I used. First, I basically control all of Central America myself. There is a huge population here, which allowed me to build a large number of towns and cities, giving these markets very high capacity. And as you can see, I'm making really good money from it. In these locations, I don't care about tax income. Anyway, that is mostly taken by the nobility, which currently gives me quite a substantial amount in taxes. Still, what they keep for themselves, they usually spend on developing RGOs in all those locations that I did not assign to any of my subject nations. My second strategy was to create colonial nations, almost immediately and continuously transfer locations to them. And I have to say, I'm not satisfied with this strategy. Colonial nations are poor, they lack population, and their base tax is not very high. Basically, all the RGOs built here were constructed by me. At the same time, I kept the entire coastline for myself, where I built many towns. This allowed me to significantly increase the trade capacity of the entire area, which also positively affects trade income. Even so, I had to manually ensure the inflow of additional workers. And if you look at the population, you can see that towns attract quite a lot of migrants. The third strategy, and probably my favorite, is that I created a single colonial nation for this entire market. And here I experimented with two things. First, I sent population from England to this colonial nation. As you can see, it has several locations with tens of thousands of inhabitants. Then I used the option to take territory from them. And now the last one I took from them is that location with 24,000. Another thing was combining the cabinet action of expelling population from a location with encouraging migration to that location. And thanks to this, I already have one large city, and soon I will have more and more. This process would continue until I was satisfied and had several cities. The area of Hispaniola I would most likely keep for myself, but I would transfer the rest of these territories to the colonial nation. After some time, why do I have to micromanage this so much? Because migration does not occur between a colonial nation and my own territory. Under no circumstances. Look, there is migration between locations within the colonial nation, but nothing moves from here to that location. And it's exactly the same here. No population from colonial nations moves to my territory, even though I tested it. Each of these colonial nations has open borders, and I also have open borders. So if you know a better way to handle colonization or combine different mechanics, let me know in the comments. I still have one idea myself, but it's a unique mechanic of Spain, and you can watch the first episode here.